Okay, this is my new choice, which is Sword of Rome, another one of my recent purchases from GMT. It's really a beautiful looking game. It's a designer edition, nice hard map. The stiffer cards, which aren't so bad in this because the decks are kind of small, so it's easier to shuffle something that stiff. We have the basic. The rule book is actually a joy. The author and designer, the designer and the developer went through and really used this system to the best that it can be used. It's still readable, etc. There's not a lot of numbering getting in the way, although I usually prefer that to this style. But they've got the references in there, and here's one of the most important things. This little right here. Each player has his own card. It includes his setup information. I mean, this is like stuff on some of the player mats, but this is definitely an improvement over a couple of the games I've been playing recently. It not only includes setup, which is kind of useful. I mean, otherwise you have to pass this around at the beginning of the game. Not that there's a lot of setup to do, so it's not a huge deal. But it also includes every special rule that affects that power, and a reference into the rule book for them. Now, I think Here I Stand has the same kind of value on the player cards, but this is a tremendous, tremendous advantage when working, because a game like this, every country has its own fair set of rules that affect it, that are a little different from everyone else and how they handle things. Let's look through. Well, the goal of the game for most of the powers is basically to capture each other's cities. You start at 6 victory points, and you lose a victory point for every home city you lose. You gain a victory point for every city you add. Some of the players have variances to this. The cards can change this. The Gauls are the big difference. They get their victory points primarily from raiding. When they take, as far as I understand, maybe I'm wrong, but they have a whole set of rules for plundering. When they enter a space that isn't Gallic, they can pillage it, spending operations for that, and they fill up, they fill up the plunder track, and once it fills up, they get a victory point. Now, their problem is that they're competing with the Transalpine Gauls, who can be activated as a minor power, and if that's done, they can go in and they can raid the Gauls, and essentially those raids work as negative raids for the Gauls. So if the Gauls have raids on the board, they get removed one by one for each success that the Transalpines do. And Transalpine ones can then replace them on the board. Once it cycles completely through, it becomes a victory point loss if needed. There's a limited diplomacy in the game. Nothing too exciting in this. You're basically able to make a diplomatic agreement for a turn. You put a chit there, and it means you can pass through each other without fighting, basically. It also means you can't conquer each other's territory. I mean, very low-level diplomatic rules. Carthage has a number of interesting factors. Now, it was added as the optional 5th player. Carthage, one of the things they have is this unrest, and down here in the Africa in Spain box, if that unrest goes up, they have to go defeat the rebellions that are present in it. And to do that, they just fight. Now, they can also just have garrisons, which limits the extent to which a rebellion can actually occur. And now, if the rebellion's allowed to continue on, they start suffering penalties. Victory points. Victory points are a per turn thing. You gain and lose victory points on each turn. So if you hold an extra city all game long, you'll be getting a point each turn for it. Likewise, the Carthage unrest can cause victory point penalties each turn. It can also reduce the amount of cards that you have in your hand. So it's a pretty bad thing to allow to increase. Now, one of the things in this one is, excuse me, combat directly affects who your political control over is. So like many of these games, you're able to just spend operations points changing political control. It doesn't look, I may be mistaken about this. I think you're only allowed to do one kind of thing in any given, yeah. So your operations points can't be allocated from what I can see. So you can spend them to activate a leader if they're good enough to cover that leader. You could play with political support, the control markers essentially. You could build reinforcements, or you could play it as an event. Now, you have to choose one of those. You can't split it up between, I got a 2-point leader to activate and I'll spend the extra point on, a PC. But activating a leader allows you to move him as full movement allowance. It's not the simplified one point per space or whatever. So it's a little different flavor in terms of what you can do with your cards from, say, Here I Stand, from Napoleonic Wars, and Here I Stand, where you're paying per space. And I actually kind of like that better. I think I like the... once you get somebody moving, it's not hard to keep them moving for a while, but actually getting an army out there acting at all is tough. But when you win a battle, you get political edge from the battle, and you're able to flip some of those political markers based on the success in the battle. And in a similar vein, if it's involving Carthage, they can play with their unrest values that way. So that's kind of a cute little aspect. Cities are taken via siege. This is actually very similar to the Conquerors. I don't know where it started out, but the siege subjugation table, where you roll a die and you get a number of siege points and some damage to your army. And you have to collect up, I guess, 3 siege points. If you succeed with that, you end up, once you get enough, you end up taking the city. This same mechanism is used when subjugating these little hexagons, which are tribal spaces. And once you've subjugated one of them, they just become a normal empty space, which is probably kind of a bone for the people who consist of those tribes. Basic battle. Basic battle is kind of interesting in this. It's very, very random. You roll a pile of dice, 3 dice, I believe. Right, what do we got here? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so you get a force modifier based on the comparison of the size. There are, of course, other modifiers as well, terrain, etc. You roll a bunch of dice, 3 each. That's a lot of variance right there. And the amount of whoever wins got the bigger roll. And then that affects the losses that are taken. But the losses are off those same dice, which means you could win a battle and cause no damage, yet take a lot yourself. That's conceivable. Most likely you're going to pretty much defeat the enemy in terms of actual casualties. And I don't know, it's an interesting looking system. The Naval Combat is doesn't really exist. It's abstracted on really only the Carthaginians can cause it. They're the only ones with enough navy to intercept a naval movement. And they just cause a failure, basically. There's limits, yeah. There's a nice support summary which indicates how you can gain or lose support in different ways. And that's kind of a nice summary. I don't know if it's necessarily the most important thing to put there. A lot of information. Got the combat modifiers over here instead of with the combat charts. That's kind of sucky. There aren't a lot, so it's not that big a deal. But yeah, it looks like it's going to be an exciting and interesting game. Between the rules being good, some interesting systems with the combat, I have a lot of high hopes for this one. And I'm going to hopefully enjoy it a great deal. Okay, I guess that's about it.